Okay. Hey everybody, we're back
Hey,
with Deep Grooves. We skipped last week just because it kind of felt weird. I don't think anyone wanted to hear us yakking about stuff back then. So we're back. We're doing top 14 prog records, and this is also going to be two-part. And let's jump right in. So first record that I'm going to talk about. I had a lot of obvious choices this week. Just because the obvious ones are the ones you need to listen to right up front. So this is very first choice. This is Fragile by Yes. And this is one of the, huge cornerstone progressive rock records. And also just, I think, like a big hit in general. I think it was a pretty popular record. You see it.
Roundabout was a enormous top 40 hit,
Yeah.
but a lot of prog stuff was actually on the charts back then.
Right. But then so people would buy the record and then they'd put it on, they'd hear Roundabout, they'd be jamming out, and then all of a sudden Rick Wakeman comes in with his like Brahms piece, and everyone's like, what the heck is going on? And then it just gets crazier from there. It's kind of set up where like every one of the band members has like a song that's like a feature, which is cool. And there's some really cool music. The artwork, as you can see, is gorgeous.
Roger Dean,
he's the man.
like all Yes covers.
Yeah, and this one, I think most that you'll find they come with like a booklet about the band with a lot of the other really great artwork. So this is like, you got to have this even if you're not a prog fan.
And if you like Roger Dean, there's a very good book out of his paintings and his record covers and everything he did. So look for it. You can buy it used. I've seen it in used bookstores, but it's a great book.
I'll keep an eye out for that. That sounds cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to get some of the obvious stuff out of the way. Got to show this. King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. Arguably some of the coolest artwork ever. And then the inside.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd talk about the context of this record. What's really unique about this record is how sophisticated it was for that time. This came out in 1969. And when you look at what else was coming out, there was a lot of other big records like Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones and Abbey Road by the Beatles, but none of it sounded like this.
Mm-hmm.
This was just a really, really deep and very textured record, and almost, you could say, sort of swayed towards jazz side of prog.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think it kind of started officially the prog movement. And then think about the fact that within a 2-year period, this came out in 69. That was their first record. Their second record, Wake of the Poseidon, came out in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
And then, let me show you a couple other versions. This is actually the Mo-Fi version, which I think is probably the best version. I've got a couple of CD versions. This is a British, actually Danish, with a nice cover.
Nice.
And then this is 2009 version with the DVD 5.1
That's the
mix.
Steven Wilson remix?
No, this is before Steven Wilson.
Okay.
And then the newest version would be the Steven Wilson version. But everybody's probably familiar with the big hit on here, 20th Century Schizoid Man.
Yeah, 21st.
The rest of it's really good too. I mean,
yeah.
The rest of it is just excellent.
It's got some of the most beautiful music and also some of the most like intense, like ruckusy music, and it's just like all across the board.
Yeah, and probably up to this point, it was probably the most classically influenced. I mean, there is a lot of stuff that is probably jazz influence, but it also had kind of classical overtones as
Yeah,
well. I had never heard anything like this.
yeah. I remember that was one of the first records you had me listen to when I was studying with you.
Yeah, I mean, 21st Century Schizoid Man in 1969. When you think about the other stuff that was out there,
Yeah,
it was quite a stretch.
right. Yeah. I'll stay on the King Crimson kind of trajectory here. This would be so for the thing about King Crimson, if you haven't like listened to them, is it's kind of more of a like an idea than an actual band almost. Like the one's member who's been the same the whole time is Robert Fripp, but he doesn't even consider himself the leader. So they have many different incarnations. We'll probably talk a little bit about another one next week, but this was kind of the next real solid lineup that they had since their first record. They had a lot of kind of transitioning, more experimental albums, and this was the one. For me, I think this is one of the best realized records they ever did. Also, they don't have any bad records, so anything you see by them, pick them up. But this one, for me, is like one of my absolute favorites. So this has Robert Fripp. It has Bill Bruford, who was on Fragile with Yes. Jamie Muir, who was the percussion player. John Wetton, who sang and played bass, and David Cross violin, and Robert Fripp. He's the kind of the genius. And this really takes the jazz and the avant-garde and the classical things way further. The first part of Lark's Tongues and Aspic, which is the opening track, has all of that. It's really dissonant, it's really funky, it's really loud, and the cover's gorgeous. So this is one of my all-time favorites. I listen to this. I come back to this all the time. It's also got some really beautiful, peaceful stuff on it too. So, yeah, this is Lark's Tongues and Aspic.
So to continue with the King Crimson theme, McDonald Giles. It's actually these two guys were on the first two King Crimson records, which would have been Court of the Crimson King and Wake of the Poseidon. This is a gorgeous record as well. Very similar production wise to Court of the Crimson King. I think the part I like the most though is there's some really interesting horn arrangements on here, and texturally it really goes the entire gamut. I mean, there's some very quiet stuff, and then funky horns in parts, but it's definitely got that same very sophisticated production flavor. This is the American version. This is the British version. So if you notice, the McDonald Giles is in green on the UK version, and it's in purple on the US version. But I would highly recommend this. It's one of those records that just sticks with you. It gets inside your brain, and it's got these very sort of consumable melodies that keep coming back to you. And I really enjoy it. I've been listening to this nonstop since the 70s, and every time I put it on, I'm like, God, I miss this. It's just so beautiful. So Michael Giles and his brother Peter, who also was a member of King Crimson on and off, are both on here, and then Ian McDonald and Stevie Winwood is on a track.
Wow.
So yeah, there's some neat stuff. So check it out. There's a couple of fairly decent CD versions of this too.
All right. Let's see. Next, this is a record that's really close to my heart. I remember I was on like a trip to Japan first time I heard it, and I was like laying in my bed and I put it on. And anyone who's heard this record will probably know the feeling I'm talking about. This is Foxtrot by Genesis. Speaking of album covers, like all these album covers are amazing. Let's see if we get the full thing. And
Yeah, that's definitely part of the Prog experience.
Yeah.
Cover art is pretty prevalent.
Yeah. And there's some things here. I think there's like a lot of references to the song lyrics and stuff in this. There's a part in one of the songs where there's a bunch of people and there's like a guy with a cross in front. The one beef I have with Genesis, actually, and I'll also mention for people who haven't listened to early Genesis, a lot of people I'll be like, oh yeah, I love Genesis, and they'll be like, yeah, and they'll mention a bunch of like later hits that I know nothing about, and I'll be like, yeah, but have you listened to their Prog stuff? And they're like, what are you talking about? So this is kind of like almost a hidden side of them, I guess, that a lot of people in my generation at least don't know about.
Well, people in my generation know.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
People that were getting into Prog in the 70s were listening to Nursery Crime and Foxtrot. And
right. The one beef I have with them is usually they'll have on their records from this period, they'll have like 2 or 3 really strong songs and then a couple, I don't know, for me that don't grab me quite as much. But the real highlights on this one, they don't have them in order on here. What's going on? Watcher of the Skies, that's the opening track. It's got this incredible organ intro, and it's got these like really intense sci-fi lyrics.
Some of Peter Gabriel's best lyrics.
Oh, easily. They're so good. And
he's got a lot of really great lyrics.
Yeah. And the other really great song is I think pretty much takes up the second side, which is Supper's Ready, which I think is an essential listen to understand what Prog is about. And it's kind of, I think it's supposed to be like a telling of the Bible somewhat, but it's kind of veiled and yeah, actually in the link below the video, I'm going to put a link to a concert because their concerts were absolutely legendary, and he came out in costumes like this, and because the visual aspect is almost as big of a part as the musical aspect, at least from that period. So very, very, very highly recommended.
So my next pick by one of my all-time favorite bands, Renaissance, Prologue. This is Renaissance' third record, but it's actually the first record with the known vocalist Annie Haslam. And if you don't know about the background of Renaissance, it's a really interesting story because the 2 main guys that started this band came from a band called the Yardbirds. And they went from basically hosting arguably the 3 best guitarists of all time, to kind of jumping into the Prog thing. And Keith Ralph, who was the guy who did most of the front work for the Yardbirds, actually had his sister doing the vocals for the first couple records. This band was originally called Illusion, and then they put out a album called Illusion, and then they put out a record, I believe, called Renaissance by Illusion, and then they changed the band to Renaissance. So this is the third record, and Jane Ralph left, and they got Annie Haslam to step in, and I think she probably is kind of what took the band in the direction that it's most known for, which is also kind of classically influenced, gorgeous female vocals, very deep conceptual lyrics, and I believe they're still around. At least she's still around. There's been various versions of this band that have gone on, come and gone for decades. But I really think this is my favorite out of the bunch.
Mm.
She's got a couple of solo records that are actually really good too. But if you're gonna get into Renaissance, start with Prologue and kind of work your way forward from there. Also got some really cool artwork.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's an easy record to find. It's not expensive. So you ought to be able to find this in any used record shop. So
I'll keep an eye out for that. My mom has a couple of their records downstairs, and for some reason, I never, in my prog phase, I never like gave them a. I think because I wasn't into like folk, the idea of folk music at the time, and so they just kind of
yeah,
turned me
it's
off.
not folk though.
Yeah, that's just like the word I heard when people were like talking about them. That they
Yeah.
kind of compared them to.
It's a little more classical flavored
Sure.
than a lot of prog stuff. It's definitely way towards that side, but
Mm.
her vocals are phenomenal.
Mm.
Just gorgeous.
All right, I'm gonna
Dig
start
'em
checking
out.
them out. Yeah. This is another. This is another like really essential, kind of probably obvious choice as far as prog. Um, and a total left turn, I think, as far as album art. This is "Thick as a Brick" by Jethro Tull, and this is right after. How does this thing even unfold? This is great to have on vinyl because it's like set up like a newspaper, and it's kind of the like the quintessential. Because we haven't really talked about this that much, but like concept album, rock opera, and it's still not entirely sure what it's about. It's about like this kid and some poem he wrote for a competition, and then it got taken away because it was too vulgar or something.
I never figured out what that record was
Yeah,
about.
I think it's more just about him showing off how good of a lyricist he is and the badass riffs and stuff that they come up with. And this was right after they did Aqualung, which is also a very important record, and I think maybe a little bit more famous, mostly because Ron Burgundy yells it in Anchorman. But people were saying that was a concept record, and he said, wasn't really a concept record. We'll show you what a concept record looks like. And then they came out with this. And there's some really cool, fun music on here. Uh, the whole thing is just like one long thing that has a break when you flip it over. It's a great record. This was like one of my mom's favorite bands when she was my age. So it's kind
Yeah, I
of
bought it brand new.
wow.
Brought it home and had no idea what it was about, and still really don't.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty cryptic.
Yeah, but it was heavy.
Yeah.
It was maybe one of the heavier Tull records.
Mm-hmm. But like easily enjoyable. Like there's like
Yeah,
anybody can get
it's
down with those melodies.
accessible.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get another sort of a more obvious pick out of the way.
Hmm.
And a lot of people probably don't think of this as a prog record, but Supertramp had plenty of top 10 hits, and actually I believe there was at least 3 45s from this. Actually maybe 4. Bloody Well Right, School, Rudy, Dreamer, they were all singles. So this is definitely towards the pop side of prog, but a lot of prog came up in the time where everything was pop. So that's the cool part about the 70s is stuff like this was actually on the radio and it was considered pop music. But this had a great influence on me. I just love it. It's one of the best produced records of all time. And the band changed after this. I think one of the members ended up leaving, and things sort of gradually disintegrated. They had a couple of very top 40 records after this, but I think this was definitely the peak, definitely the top of their game, And anybody who grew up in the 70s like myself loved it. I mean, this is just a pivotal record.
Mm.
And I still love it. This is actually the Speaker's Corner version. If you're looking for a really good high-end audiophile version, the Speaker's Corner version is out of print now, but it's probably the best version I've heard. But again, you can find just a regular version of this anywhere for $10 or less.
Yeah. I'll have to. I probably haven't listened to that since high school. I'll have to reinvestigate it. That was like, my prog phase. I think when you turned me on to that one. I'm gonna take a huge jarring shift and talk about the absolutely not, at least for this record, the not poppy side of prog, and that is one of my favorite bands, Gentle Giant, and this is called, I think the official live Gentle Giant, I think is what this is called, and I think it's a good starting point for getting into the band. Mainly because you'll be listening to it and you'll be like, there's got to be at least like 20 guys up there, and there's only 5 of them, but they each play. Actually, I did the math last week. I think they each play an average of like 6 instruments, including like recorder, trumpet, vibes. What else they got? Violin, cello. So it's
they're pretty esoteric.
They're very esoteric, and maybe not for everybody. They're a little bit ridiculous, but they're also really virtuosic. And so this is a good record of an entry point, just so you can kind of hear what they sound like and how much energy they have. So some of my favorite tunes off of this are Proclamation, which is from the album, what's it called? The one with the playing card.
Oh, yeah.
Well, whatever that one is, which is also a concept record. Excerpts from Octopus, which I think I like better actually than the album. And
that's my favorite. Actually, Octopus is probably my favorite Gentle Giant record.
Yeah.
As a side note, all of their better stuff, like Octopus, just got put out on some really nice 180 gram pressings.
Oh, wow.
So just got reissued last week.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, my other favorite album by them, which I don't have, which is why I'm not holding it up, is Acquiring the Taste, which has a very kind of lewd album cover, but that one's also really good. Anything, I think, I don't have their discography in front of me. I think this is kind of the point right before they started trying to go commercial, and it didn't really work out that well for them. So their early stuff is kind of the stuff you want to be listening to. It was kind of a trend, I think, in most prog bands, that they started off really great, and a lot of them kind of tried to go commercial, and it didn't work out.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of these bands were European, and they maybe were somewhat successful in that market,
Yeah.
and then tried to expand into the American market, where, like I said before, prog was basically pop music here.
Right.
And so when they tried to get into the US market, they maybe tried to kind of water it down just a tad.
Yeah, because I mean, it pretty much happened to all
Get
of
it
them.
on the radio.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that was happening is radio was changing.
Right.
The whole prog thing started out in sort of 70s underground album rock radio. And that gradually was turning in 70s album rock radio, kept getting more and more commercial as time went on.
Yeah.
By the end of the 70s, they were not too album oriented anymore.
Right.
They were playing the singles. Everything was kind of based on the singles market, and a lot of these prog records didn't really have singles.
Right.
They weren't supposed to have singles. They were conceptual records. Right. They were meant to sit down and absorb the story of the entire record. So I gave you a bunch of my more mainstream picks, the stuff that had to happen. And now I'm gonna get into some of the stuff that I really love, but it's much more obscure. So this is a band from Finland called Finnforest,
Hmm.
and it's a little harder to find, but these guys are everything that's good about the prog thing, all rolled up into one band. It's a conceptual. The instrumentation is absolutely incredible. It does sort of veer towards the jazz thing a little bit. There's also some keyboard stuff that kind of, um, you know, dips its toe into the kind of classical vein, but really well arranged and pretty easy to listen to. I mean, it's one of those records you can put on, and I don't know how many records these guys had, but I was lucky enough to pick up two of them. I believe it's the first two. I believe this is their first record, and I had no idea what they were when I picked them up. A friend of mine just said, "Yeah, you should check these out." But killer band, just amazing stuff, and like I said, very easy to listen to and very dynamic. So if you ever get a chance to find any of this stuff,
Hmm.
the first two records at least are excellent. That's the back.
Hmm.
So this is actually a Finnish import. It's on a Finnish label called Love Records, and sounds great. I mean, the production is outstanding.
Cool.
So Finnforest.
Let's see. Next, I'm going to talk about a record that you actually had me get. This is the first Soft Machine record, which I don't know if you, I know you have one of your picks as a Soft Machine
Yeah,
record.
I picked the third.
The third, yeah.
That'll
I
be in the
still,
second batch.
I'm still kind of a beginner. The Soft Machine was one of the bands that was part of the Canterbury scene, which more or less happened around Canterbury in England, but not necessarily everyone was from there, and not necessarily all the music was happening there. And this is one of the very early records, and it's kind
That's
of
the very first record,
the very
actually.
first. Okay, and it's kind of like a little bit of like Tony Williams' Lifetime meets Hendrix Experience, somewhat, and very very jazzy, but also
Robert
very very
Wyatt was kind of the dark side of Peter Gabriel.
yeah, sure
he
sure
he
sure
was he was he was kind of the Edgar Allan Poe uh, version of Gabriel, really dark
yeah yeah. So
lyrically.
it's very dark and also very absurd. The lyrics, they don't quite reach me like some of the other prog bands do, but the energy and the psychedelic, it's very very psychedelic, very very like there's still a lot of 60s rock prevalent, which was kind of missing from a lot of the other bands at the time who
Yeah,
were
some
kind of like,
people actually consider them psychedelic.
yeah, no, they
Some
definitely
people
are.
consider them prog, but the interesting part about the band is I think their first three records were the best, and they sort of transitioned from prog to almost full on jazz by
Mhm.
the third record.
Yeah.
The record I'm going to show on the next batch is pretty much straight out fusion
Hmm. Yeah.
with
So
little bits of psychedelia
yeah,
shining through.
cool, cool. Yeah. So this is cool, and this kind of set me off recently on just kind of a little bit of an examination of the whole Canterbury thing. There's If you have Apple Music, they have a really good playlist of a bunch of different Canterbury bands, and there's some really really cool music that went on there. So this is kind of, I think, probably a good starting point just for figuring out what that's about.
So I got one more here, another more obscure pick, Kayak. This is called Royal Bed Bouncer. So these guys are Dutch, and this came out in 1975. another just really solid prog record. Fun to listen to, heavy. It's pretty cool gatefold. So I just picked this up on a whim. I really didn't know what it was. It looked like prog, obviously with the cover, but you know how it is. A lot of the prog stuff you pick up ends up being kind of pseudo prog, and it
Right.
kind of isn't proggy enough for me usually. But this one I really love. This is a excellent record, and I've since ordered a couple of other things by these guys. So I hope they're as good as this. But this is getting into the mid 70s, and it definitely changed.
Mhm.
So
Wait, is that your last?
that's my last
Did
one.
you only have 6 then?
I don't know, but I have more.
Okay, yeah, because I think because we're doing 7, right? So I have one more.
Yeah, I'll grab another one.
Okay. While you're grabbing that, I'm just gonna hold this one up. This is kind of the holy grail of prog records. I think probably if you listen to one prog record in your life, I think maybe this should be it, which I think would maybe be almost uncontested in the prog community. This is Close to the Edge by Yes, and this was the same lineup that was on Fragile. This is actually the album right after Fragile, and they really kind of kick it up quite a bit. And the Close to the Edge is the first kind of suite on the first side of the record. It's 20 minutes long, and it's really, really beautiful. And it's got all these gorgeous sections, and I think some of Steve Howe's best guitar playing is on here. And then the other track I really like is Siberian Katru, which is really great. I don't really know how to hype up this record enough.
Well, it's probably their most conceptual record, and it's probably their best writing, I think.
Yeah, and their most, I think, unified sounding record for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably what they're going for on other previous records, but didn't quite get there.
Yeah.
So this one you really have to sit down and listen to the entire record,
Yeah,
front and back, to understand it.
right. Yeah, and I think I like, there's a lot of lore on Yes, but the 2 records that they had after that, I think they were trying to recapture somewhat what they had done, and maybe didn't, or maybe went a little overboard on the things that worked, but kind of. So the next album was like a 2 LP suite called Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is like long and kind of
It was
has
almost too
filler. Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost too heavy and
Yeah.
and too deep.
Right.
I don't think most people, even the Yes guys, really got that.
Yeah.
It's hard to listen to. I like it, but this is so much easier to listen to. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Topographic Oceans was very, very conceptual.
Right. And then the one after that was Relayer, which I like a lot. Most of it. I like most of that record, but it wasn't quite as it felt like they were maybe reaching for it rather than actually just like sitting in
yeah, I think Close to the Edge was kind of their peak.
Yeah.
So this is another kind of more obscure pick, but I think most of the prog guys know PFM, Chocolate Kings. And PFM is a really interesting band that has been around in several versions, but I think this is my favorite of all of their stuff. Just really, again, really solid prog, excellent instrumentation, and this guy's got a really kind of eerie Peter Gabriel sort of voice too. I really like it. It's a little more maybe accessible than Peter Gabriel at times, but really good songs. Like I said, these guys have got a lot of other stuff out, but I really like this record.
Cool.
So It's on a more obscure record label. Actually, it was put out by Asylum. I think it was recorded on the other record label was Manicore,
Mm-hmm.
but this is a Blue Asylum label. So excellent sounding record too.
Cool.
Incredible production.
These more obscure bands, I've never even heard of these. I think cause I had my prog phase like in high school, and I don't know if I went in as deep as I would now. Actually, I have one more thing to mention, by the way, which is not a record, if that's okay. This is just like a book that I found at the Museum of Musical Instruments in Phoenix called Mountains Come Out of the Sky, which is the chorus to Roundabout. The Illustrated History of Prog Rock by Will Romano, which is a pretty good book if you just want to like get a kind of a big broad strokes view of progressive rock. It talks about all the phases of it and all the bands, most of the bands. The writing's okay, but it's nice just to have all the covers and the chronology and connections right in front of you. So this is a cool book. You can find it if you're interested.
Yeah, I'll try to grab that Roger Dean book and show that on part 2 as well.
That'd be cool.
Because if you're going to delve into the artwork side of Prog, he's the guy.
Yeah.
He's the Picasso of Prog record covers.
Yeah.
So I want to mention we're going to be back next week with part 2 of our Prog picks, and wanted to mention that I own Paramount Record Shop in Watertown, Wisconsin. We've got a huge selection of really nice vintage stuff, as well as some newer boutique pressings. We're open Fridays and Saturdays and by appointment during the week. So all the info will be at the end of the video. So stop by and see us. We buy collections. So
yeah, go check it out, everybody. All right.
See you next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and listen to some good music. Bye-bye.